Hello and welcome to AviaDev Insight Africa Connectivity Update for 2026. This is our 30th edition, and this is the podcast offering a deep dive into the stories behind the route developments to, from, and within the African continent. Let me just check our layout here. Are you guys seeing the full screen or just the corners like me? I'm just going to change the view.
I see my head in a box, but looking at the YouTube feed doesn't show anything, and the LinkedIn feed shows us okay. Both the feeds have us just in three boxes on the side, so nobody's in the main window
I
on
think
both
I know
LinkedIn and
why.
YouTube.
Yeah, I think I know why. Sorry about this, everybody watching. You can tell it is live. It's something to do. There we go. We have fixed it. Perfect.
Yay, we're
So,
fixed.
welcome everyone. As you can tell, highly professional production from me once again. We are the podcast offering a deep dive into the stories behind the route developments to, from, and within the African continent. I am your host, John Howell. I'm the CEO and founder of AviaDev Africa. We are streaming live on YouTube and on LinkedIn, hopefully. So hi to everybody on those platforms watching, and those watching on demand who obviously couldn't be with us live for the broadcast. If you want to make any comments, any suggestions, add them to the chat on YouTube or wherever you wish, and we will look to respond and maybe even throw up some of those comments onto the screen as well and respond as we go. Now, as always, as you can see on the screen, I am joined by our usual suspects, aviation consultant Sean Mendis and Behramjee Ghadially. And as I said earlier, this is our 30th edition of this monthly podcast, so good commitment. And the podcast in its own right turns 8 years old on Friday, on the 24th of April. That will be our 8th anniversary since our first episode. So a massive thanks to both of them for all their work preparing for this podcast. I call it work, but I know it is also their hobby and their passion. So perhaps we're offering an outlet for them to share their opinions and their knowledge with the world. But great to have you both with us. So welcome to the podcast. Now, as always, the disclaimer is that the opinions shared on the podcast are those of our guests, do not necessarily represent those of AviaDev. This disclaimer is becoming more and more important every single month. But as always, there is lots of news impacting our wonderful industry. So we expect to be here for around the next 90 minutes or so. So welcome to the AviaDev Connectivity Update for April 2026. Okay. Behramjee is joining us from a beautiful restaurant in Cameroon. You are currently muted, Behramjee, because there's some beautiful tinkly music in the background. But I want to come with you with just a bit of an overview of where we stand here on the 22nd of April in terms of the African aviation industry. You know, how are we coping with the volatility? How worried should we be? Just your thoughts really about where we stand right now.
Okay, thank you, John. Well, in Africa, right now, what has been happening is that on the east coast of Africa, there have been fuel supply issues starting to affect airlines. As we have previously reported as well, Ethiopian Airlines sometimes refuels their flights to Asia and Europe in certain nearby airports as the scarcity is slowly starting to hit the east coast. In Central Africa, where I am right now, no such issues. The fuel price has increased, but not too much. Where fuel prices have increased are more so in West Africa, especially in Francophone West Africa. When it comes to demand, at least within Africa, we have not seen any change in demand cycles whatsoever. What has changed for the benefit of African carriers, especially Ethiopian and Kenya Airways and Egypt Air, is that passengers from the southern African belt are avoiding flying through the Middle East, even though the fares are very, very cheap. They're willing to pay a bit more extra and fly via Addis, Nairobi, or Cairo to get to Europe and USA. Uh, Even though it's a bit more expensive, but they rather have peace of mind doing that. On my flight, I recently flew Ethiopian 3 weeks ago to Toronto. From Addis to Toronto, it was completely sold out, 97% full. Economy was sold out as business class cabin, a few seats empty. And there was a nice mix of passengers. We had a good mix of Indians, Chinese, Africans, and even few people who had come from the Middle East. They'd gone to Saudi Arabia and then taken Ethiopian from there to connect. On the way back, though, from Washington, my flight was empty, 33% load factor only. However, interesting part was that that same week, the flights from New York were quite full on Ethiopian. And the reason being is there had a lot of Indian traffic on those New York flights. Even my Washington Lome flight, there were many passengers flying business class from Washington to Bangalore on Ethiopian Airlines via Lome. So interesting thing is that, well, it's not too surprising because New York has a much higher demand scale compared. Hence, flights were on the way back from Africa, from New York, were more full compared to Washington. I was very happy because I got 3 seats to sleep on, so no issues for me. Apart from that, nothing else major happening that's affected the continent so far.
All right, cool. Yeah, a very granular and very personal account of obviously what's going on. And Sean, you want to give us a bit more of a macro view?
I think Behramjee is fairly accurate in terms of that. We have not really seen a demand shift yet in Africa, and I think that goes in line with what I said last month, in that unfortunately African prices are already so high that for the most part they are largely inelastic as far as demand goes. Now we're seeing we'll see a little bit more of a drop in demand in South Africa. We've got a long weekend coming up over there, and I think stuff like that in the domestic market where there is elastic demand is going to probably see the hit initially. But remember that petrol prices for road transport are going up at the same time. This is not something that's just exclusive to jet fuel. And consequently, where you have the option of, say, flying between Johannesburg and Durban, and those prices may have gone up by 10 to 15%. At the same time, the cost of driving between Johannesburg and Durban has probably also gone up 10 to 15, or maybe even more. And as a result, I think certainly this is going to be a bit of a squeeze in terms of general macroeconomic conditions. And I mean, we're seeing that in terms of, again, something which unfortunately we predicted last month, is that the physical shortage of commodity is going to be more of a challenge than the actual pricing as far as African demand goes. So yeah, I'm not that fussed about again, we've seen that the displacement of carriers from the Middle East, even though the Middle East is beginning to bounce back now, Qatar is opening up a lot more of their destinations. Emirates is running pretty much a stable 70% of pre-conflict schedule right now. Qatar is getting up to about 40-something, 50%. Etihad obviously is trying to be quite aggressive at this point, although a lot of their moves are not for right now. They're for much further down the line. But to their credit, I'll give them a lot of credit for this. They're taking the option of being handed lemons and making lemonade while everybody else is grating it and trying to get lemon zest for a pound cake. I don't know why I said that, but anyway. But yeah, I think that's largely where we're at. Africa remains... Africa suffers so often from these global crises that really don't affect Africa directly, that maybe we're just used to it and immune to it. Okay, there's a war here, that's going to affect us badly. There's a pandemic here, that's going to affect us badly. And life just goes on because there's always some crisis or the other. And I think that's largely where things are in Africa. Certainly we're seeing higher prices, we're seeing fuel shortages, but if it wasn't this war, it would be some other issue.
Yeah, very pragmatic. Okay, well, we are where we are, and people are getting on.
Let me add my bit. let me add my bit since Behramjee's given his personal thing. I also flew Ethiopian last week, and my flight from Mumbai to Addis Ababa was 100% full. Even though I didn't get 3 seats across, I did get a seat in the premium economy, former China Southern premium economy cabin of ETBBG, the ex-China Southern 777-300ER, which Ethiopian operates, and so that gives me 7 inches of extra legroom. And that was a quite pleasant experience. I was in Addis actually on the same days as the Ethiopian Aviation Forum conference, which I did not even notice was happening, which was sad because there were a few people there who I'd have loved to catch up with. But if you were there and missed me, sorry, I did not know you were there until John told me that, oh, that's happening today. And I'm like, is it really? But yeah. So yeah, and but I think Behramjee is right, and I think this is an interesting point to note because I've seen an increase in a number of passengers doing this, and that was also reflected on my flight from India, which is that a lot of passengers from India who would previously be traveling by the Middle East hubs to North America are now using Addis Ababa as a potential option. So we had a significantly larger number of passengers traveling to Canada and the US than usually is the case. Usually from Mumbai, there's hardly anybody traveling to to Canada or the US, and that Delhi to Canada via Addis has always had a bit of traffic, but Mumbai hasn't. And here, I think there were like 60 odd passengers, who were doing it with an 8-hour layover in Addis Ababa as well. So it was a fairly significant number of people who were choosing this route, and I think that's where Ethiopian is. The silver lining of Ethiopian's network is that they can really take advantage of this. And I know anecdotally, Kenya Airways is seeing the same in terms of their JFK flights, where there are people actually flying Mumbai, Nairobi, JFK. And that's good because, we're in the relatively low season right now, post-Easter and pre-summer. And this is the time where if you get any little bit of extra traffic, it all adds up in the end. So good luck to both of them. And I hope, these little bits of extra non-traditional market demand, at least they can retain some of it in the longer run, but importantly, they can offset some of the losses from the higher fuel price and other macroeconomic conditions that are affecting them.
Yeah, perfect. And just to add my bit to that, I will be flying to Addis on Monday evening from London on the A350-1000, I believe, which will be lovely. Overnight for the IATA Focus Africa event. So if anybody who is watching is going to be there, obviously get in touch. We'll catch up when we get to Addis. But weirdly, I've been through Addis quite a few times recently, but I haven't actually been there for quite a while. So it will be great to see a few people.
The last time you were there actually was when we were there for, what was it? Mark Brown's event
Aviation
back in
Africa,
2020.
yeah, just as COVID hit.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's been a long time.
Just as COVID hit.
Literally, get home before they close.
March 2020. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I arrived there, nobody was wearing masks, and I went home after the plane was. So, that tells you how the world changes in 3 days.
Absolutely. And my abiding memory was how people were greeting each other. Some people were like using their feet or their elbows or headbutting each other or just shaking hands normally. And I think we were probably a perfect spot to be spreading this around the world because it was obviously a big gathering. Right, let's get on with the news then. So we've set sort of macro where we're at, and I think there's good resilience as always in African aviation. But where else can we start but with the big news that we got at the end of last week coming out of Etihad's HQ? So 6, not 1, not 2, but 6 new African destinations to be added to the network. Added to this, of course, is the team from Etihad are going to be with us in Botswana for AviaDev, which is really exciting. For the first time, we'll have Etihad with us after 10 years. So delighted to have them with us. So I want to start with you, Behramjee. Run us through the route and run us through your initial thoughts, because I know you've been doing some homework on this and you've got some numbers behind it. So you can kick us off with this.
I'm unmuted. Okay. So firstly, with regards to Etihad, they had announced, much to everyone's surprise, a massive expansion for China initially a few weeks ago, where they announced 4 new cities. actually 5 if you consider Shanghai resumption, but then as well as Guangzhou resumption, because Guangzhou was actually opened in 2022 and then shut down a year later. So they announced initially their China expansion, and then last week they announced the Africa expansion. Just like everything in life, there are pros and cons to this, and I will objectively analyze the good and the bad for Etihad over here. To start off with, the main information is that the Chinese expansion is
Oh, we're losing you.
You're losing me?
Yeah, you're back again, but the internet in that restaurant isn't quite as bulletproof as we'd hoped.
Isn't it
It's not
fine?
as good. It's not as good as the Indian toast or whatever it is that we can see you're eating.
Oh,
It's coming back. Keep going.
Okay, so Shanghai will be restarted as a daily flight using a 787. Chengdu will be 4 times a week from March next year using a 787-9. Guangzhou from the onset will be a daily flight using a 787-9. Also from March, all the new Chinese routes as well as the resumption of Shanghai will be with the 787-9. And as well as Shenzhen and Hangzhou, they will be flown 5 times a week each using a 787-9. Now, with regards to China, Etihad currently only operates to Beijing. They used to operate a daily flight, but due to their own internal issues as well as something within the Chinese market, they reduced Beijing from daily to 5 times a week. Then it got reduced to 4 times. Shanghai was suspended in 2025 summer, and now it's going to be resumed in 2027. Guangzhou was initially launched in 2022 but failed quite badly and was suspended by February 2024. The main reason why Guangzhou, I feel, was suspended so far is because it only had European and GCC connections at the time. They did not have any Africa connections. So they missed that key market segment to feed it. So then, after the Chinese expansion was announced, people were commenting online that, in order to feed this expansion, especially for Guangzhou, Etihad must learn from its past mistakes and increase its Africa footprint. Otherwise, the Chinese strategy, especially for Guangzhou, will fall flat on its head. So obviously, this was planned months in advance, and Etihad has made the correct move from a strategic point of view to expand into Africa, also from March 2027. However, there's one route which will start before that, which is a surprise route for everyone. Asmara in Eritrea. That will start with 4 times a week in A320 from November 2026, so this upcoming winter season. Following which, Accra will be launched 4 times a week with a 787-9 from March next year. Harare and Lubumbashi in Congo, that will be operated as a triangle route 3 times a week with a 787. Kinshasa also will be launched from DRC 3 times a week with a 787. And then we have with a 787 on a daily basis. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are pros and cons to this. People think that Africa to China market will be their saving grace. Unfortunately, the reality is completely different. The demand for Africa to China, especially for Guangzhou, is quite decent, but it's very, very low yielding. Etihad will be competing against Ethiopian, Kenya Airways, Air Tanzania, Qatar Airways, and Emirates. Once Qatar and Emirates get their act together in terms of network expansion, but it depends also on the GCC ongoing conflict. So it's not going to be a walk in the park for Etihad at all. Apart from Guangzhou, the demand for the other cities in China from Africa is quite low, from sub-Saharan Africa at least. Yes, there is very high demand from Egypt, which Etihad flies to, which I'm sure they'll get a lot of transit traffic. But from sub-Saharan Africa, the demand is very, very low. For example, the biggest demand for Beijing is from Addis Ababa which is only about 22,000 passengers. For Shanghai, it is Nairobi at 27,000 passengers. For Hangzhou, the biggest sub-Saharan market is Lagos with 6,000 passengers only. And Shenzhen has very little demand for Africa. It's mainly cargo. But Chengdu, the biggest market is Lumbashi at 20,000 passengers. So one thing also we have to also realize is that the Africa-China market, especially for Guangzhou, is vast majority point of sale Africa. So the currency that Etihad will be getting is African local currency. Won't be Chinese yuan or US dollars, etc., etc. And that's where the problem will be getting money out of certain markets. I believe Asmara in Eritrea has a lot of problems getting money out of there. And I don't know what the latest situation is in Congo, but Eritrea for sure, Etihad will have problems getting forex out of there. When it comes to China and Africa's point of sale, Etihad, unfortunately, that's their main weakness historically and as well as presently. If they could not make Shanghai work post-COVID with such a big European network, the chances of Shanghai working again are quite lower than 50%. And also, if Shanghai could not work initially, the chances of Hangzhou, Chengdu, and Guangzhou also look quite bleak. The good thing about Africa in their expansion is looking at niche markets, which are Lumbashi and Kinshasa. Now, Kinshasa is interesting because I believe they will be focusing on targeting the Dubai point-to-point market via a bus service from Abu Dhabi. As the Dubai-Kinshasa market is around 100,000 passengers annually round trip, and Lumbashi is over 30,000 for that. Lumbashi also has a lot of traffic for Guangzhou and Beijing and Chengdu, as I mentioned earlier. So that also they'll be willing, hoping. To me is too ambitious and too optimistic. It's only a 7-hour flight, block time from Abu Dhabi. The correct way, in my opinion, to have launched Kinshasa would be using the A321LR initially. Yes, if the demand picks up and if commercial economics warrant it, then maybe they can do it on 787. But starting the route with the 787, I understand maybe it's because of baggage issues, but I do not see the demand being there for 77 from the onset.
See Sean shaking his head, but keep your powder dry, Sean. Keep your powder dry.
It's dry and loaded.
So another very good thing about this Africa-China expansion of Etihad is that unlike what they did in the past under the Hogan era, is that all the Chinese African flights are connected with a 1-hour, 15-minute transit in Abu Dhabi in both directions. That is a very important and key selling point which the Etihad sales people have to take advantage of. However, again, as I stated before, and as Sean also knows, it can also be a weakness for them because Etihad's main problem in China and in Africa is a local sales team. The point of sale Africa historically for Etihad has been ignored and has not been not given that much importance. And the same thing can be said about China, which everyone can see through their results in both these regions. What else? When it comes to Accra also, the timings are basically there for Asian connections. And for an airline like Qatar Airways, which has not performed well in Accra over the past few years, and they have a much bigger Asian network and much more connections also to Europe and North America via Doha, but they've not managed to crack the Accra market. And the main reason is also the point-to-point market for Doha Accra is not that big. Etihad also will be hoping to get a lot of Dubai traffic via Abu Dhabi on the Accra route because Abu Dhabi point-to-point is very, very low. So I feel Accra will be a struggle for them. Lagos should be okay from a load point of view because of all-round demand, but the yields of Lagos will be a problem. Cargo for both China and Africa, at least in one direction, should do well. Belly cargo, so I have no issues with that. But overall, judging by Etihad's historical sales performance on the ground in China and Africa, it will be a monumental task for them to make these routes survive beyond 2 years. So that's my analogy of.
Cool. All right.
Like
Let's
I said,
fire up
there are pros and cons. But I
pros and
think the
cons.
yeah, there are pros and cons, but I feel the cons slightly outweigh the pros over here.
All right. Well, let Sean come back, and then we'll let you respond to that, because this was our sort of deep dive section. But yeah, Sean, did you make some notes, or is it all you know where to start? So go.
Okay. To begin with, I completely disagree with Behramjee on pretty much 80% of the points he's raised. I think disclosure here, I've had conversations with the decision makers at Etihad about the African market in the past, although we don't have a formal relationship. So I do know what they're thinking of and so forth. And you know, I think the main point over here is regards why so many new routes and why such a big gamble in Africa is less about Africa than generally about Etihad's general business structure. Etihad has been restructuring the airline and route network in the post-COVID era anyway, and its biggest weak spot during this time has been Africa. And they made this very clear last year when they entered into the strategic partnership and code-share agreement with Ethiopia to start building their footprint into African markets. And in fact, these services are simply representing the next phase of that expansion. So I'm not particularly surprised that Africa is where they are doubling down. It was the whole where I mean they're just taking a leaf out of what Qatar did during the pandemic, is not let a good crisis go to waste and double down, because this is your chance to to win the markets. The difference, though, is I think their choice of these 6 markets are very, very strategic. And unlike what Behramjee says, where he's just looking in terms of point of sale, they won't be successful in things. They're actually looking at markets where either there is a void or where there is sufficient volume for them to be able to compete, or in fact even offer superior or comparable services to those who are currently in that market, or finally to backfill some of their current services which they may be anticipating the market may not recover strongly enough. So let's look at okay, Asmara for starters. Nobody is going into Asmara with the intent of selling tickets with point of sale Eritrea. I mean, that's ridiculous. Eritreans can't even get bloody passports, let alone actually buy tickets to go on holidays to Etihad's wide network and their daily flights to Krabi and other points in Thailand. So that's, they're not doing it for that. They are connecting the capital of the UAE to the capital of Eritrea. Keep in mind that the UAE is very heavily involved in the Horn of Africa, and especially involved in Sudan, which has a humongous border with Eritrea. And there is a lot of traffic, which is currently already flying between the UAE and Eritrea, a lot of it with transponder off cargo, supplies, military flights, and stuff like that. This is not something that is targeted at commercial traffic. This is stuff that is targeted at governmental traffic, at strategic traffic, and things as such. An A320 flying between Abu Dhabi and Eritrea is not a humongous risk, and I don't think it's something that matches the strategy for the other 5 routes. And that is also why they are launching Eritrea like now, but the rest of the routes are only coming in March of 27 together with their 5 new Chinese routes. So let's look at the other 5 routes one by one. Accra. Let's start with Accra, since Behramjee seems to think that that's one that is not going to be successful. So if you look in terms of the Ghana to UAE market, and when I'm speaking now of I'll use Dubai, Abu Dhabi, UAE interchangeably here, because these airports are basically, I mean, to get from Abu Dhabi airport to Dubai is an hour. So in fact, to get from Dubai airport to some parts of Dubai, depending on traffic, might actually be quicker to start in Abu Dhabi, depending on the traffic and the day of the week. So
Yeah,
as
we've
far
said
as
that
goes,
before,
it is
haven't
one
we?
catchment area.
Yeah, we've
Yeah,
talked
and
about
this
that
is
with
what we
some
have
of
to
the
look when you
Ethiopian
look in
routes and
terms
things.
of. Exactly. And so when you look in terms of, well, people don't fly to Abu Dhabi, that's nonsense. They're flying to Dubai. And I promise you, price sensitive customers and customers who are going to African customers going to the UAE are perfectly happy to fly to Sharjah or Abu Dhabi or Dubai or Ras Al Khaimah or Fujairah or Al Ain if they can get a good deal to go there. So Etihad knows that this market is there for the taking. They offer a complimentary bus for all passengers who land at Abu Dhabi just to get into Dubai. So you just get off the plane in Abu Dhabi, you get on the bus there, and it drops you on Sheikh Zayed Road. So, I mean, this is not like Dubai and Abu Dhabi should be considered separate markets. So let's look at Accra then. So Accra, Ghana in general. So it's all points in Ghana, Accra, Kumasi, Tamale, etc. to the UAE. That market grew by 30% in 2025 to around 170,000 passengers. That's not a joke. And more importantly, now Emirates is flying a daily 777-300ER in that market, but still, despite that, 45% of passengers O&D between Ghana and the UAE are still flying via indirect carriers, primarily Ethiopian, but also Rwanda Air and Kenya Airways. So that means 45% of 170,000 passengers can potentially be lured away to a non-stop flight into the UAE from Ghana. That alone is about 75 to 80,000 passengers who are there for the taking. It's an existing market that they can win away with a non-stop flight. Now, on top of that, Emirates, 47% of Emirates passengers from Accra are connecting onward from Dubai. In the case of Qatar, 73% of Qatar passengers are connecting onwards from Doha. As far as Etihad's capacity goes, if they're even able to capture 30 to 40% of their O&D traffic to, or of their capacity as O&D traffic between Accra and Dubai, that will put them in Accra and the UAE. So as I said, they're all interchangeable as far as this goes. That will put them in a position where they have the ability to connect passengers onwards to India, where they have a very strong market. They have a code share with Akasa. They have the ability to serve a lot of secondary Indian markets, which more than Emirates does currently. They have the 5 new routes to Shanghai, Guangzhou, Chengdu, Hangzhou, and Shenzhen. And they're all starting at exactly the same time. I think that alone is going to make Accra a success. Between UAE, China, and India, they can fill those planes up, and as long as they are disciplined with their yield management, of course they've got to do a good job as far as the sales go. There's no reason why this cannot be a success. I'm optimistic about that, and I think it's a very similar situation for Lagos. Lagos, of course, the O&D demand to the UAE is affected because Nigeria still struggles to get tourist visas to the UAE. But I think the onward markets to India, the onward markets to China in particular from Nigeria, these are markets, I won't say with infinite demand, but with demand that far outstrips the current capacity in them. And there is no non-stop player flying Nigeria, India. There's no non-stop player flying Nigeria to China. So Etihad is on an equivalent footing with the Emirates, with the Ethiopians in terms of what product they're offering. If they can come in with a good product offering, with good pricing offering, that is, target the traders with excess baggage offers and things like that, there is absolutely no reason why they cannot be successful. The Nigerian market is perfectly happy to try out a new carrier in the right circumstance. So I think Nigeria makes sense. But the real smart ones over here are Congo and I think people why they to be watching buying more the dump Lusaka and Harare and get fifth freedom rights between those two. Just an interesting point. Lusaka Harare, actually 88 point something percent of passengers who fly that route, which is the second largest intra-African route, intra-sub-Saharan African route, that actually fly on fifth freedom carriers. So actual Zambian and Zimbabwean carriers only only have about 12% of the traffic on that route. And even that has gone down since FastJet has suspended their services, but just a complete aside over there. But yeah, so when you're looking in terms of that, the largest market from Harare, as we have heard from every year from Airbus on the underserved markets, is Harare to the UK. Etihad obviously has a very strong presence in the UK. It may not be as strong as Qatar Airways, is probably flying something like 43 daily flights now, or something equally ridiculous. Qatar and Emirates are super strong there. But as we have discussed before, passengers originating in the UK are not going to be using the Middle Eastern hubs as connecting hubs to travel primarily to Southeast Asia and Australia for the foreseeable future, primarily because UK insurance carriers are no longer covering passengers transiting to Middle Eastern hubs. In order to backfill that capacity to the UK, from the guys who used to be flying to Phuket, the guys who used to be flying to Australia, the guys who would have been flying to Hong Kong via Abu Dhabi, those passengers are the ones now who they can bring onto the Harare route. Because remember, Harare to the UK is another one of these pretty much infinite demand markets, a market where Ethiopian has been dominating in recent time, but where Etihad is making the gamble that they can potentially backfill their UK services in particular with this connecting traffic from Harare. But let's look further then at Lubumbashi, because Lubumbashi is a very underappreciated market. There are some huge numbers from there. Lubumbashi is Ethiopia's second largest market from India after Johannesburg. I mean, I know we've mentioned that before, and Behramjee loves saying, I bet you'll never guess which market it is. And, if you listen to the show, when Behramjee says that, the chances are Lubumbashi is the market that he's referring to when he asks you that question.
And the chances are I always get it wrong as well. So, yeah.
Also true, but I wasn't going to dwell on that part of it. But, Lubumbashi, the competition is basically only Ethiopian. And when you look in terms of what they're doing, and I mean, Lubumbashi to Chengdu shocked me in terms of how large that market is. We're talking 30,000 odd passengers a year. Lubumbashi to Chengdu. Then we're looking at other markets like Kinshasa. Kinshasa to Dubai. Kinshasa to the UAE alone is 130-something passengers, growing at 10% plus per year. This is going to be the first non-stop flight between Kinshasa and the UAE. I mean, come on. Do you really think that that is going to struggle in any way, shape, or form in terms of attracting demand? That's 130,000 passengers who are in fact, it's more. 130,000 passengers is what Ethiopian alone is transporting on that. The total amount is close to 160 plus. So, I mean, when you look at that, out of 130,000 passengers, if you can draw 50 or 60,000, not even half the number of passengers on that route to your non-stop flight, the first and only non-stop flight, it is there for the taking. It's candy from a baby. And so when you look in terms of these 5 routes, and if you had to pick 5 routes to start, where you have either markets that are underserved, markets that you have a product that is competitive in, or markets that are just there for the taking. Out of those 5 sub-Saharan routes, excluding Asmara, these are probably 5 of the smartest markets to choose. It is a lot smarter than some of their previous decisions of doubling down on Nairobi and, selling ridiculously low yield fares into Johannesburg and things as such. These are markets where they legitimately can be successful. So I've been critical of Etihad a lot of times before. I cannot really find a reason to be critical of this. This is them looking ahead. This is looking, it's not something that's going to start tomorrow. I think the only thing that really is done for show over here or for the splash is announcing 6 African and 5 Chinese routes, in one single event. But, we all know Arik Day. This is something that Arik loves to do. He likes making a splash. He gets people talking about it because of the splash. And sometimes a splash is warranted. And I think this is something which is really warranted, but not just warranted, it has been thought through. And I think this will be successful. So I'll put money down on it, Behramjee, again, if you want. You say it's not going to last more than 2 years. I say that it will outlive our podcast. I think that at least 2 or 3 of these routes will be around longer than this podcast will. And considering that this podcast intends to be around for the very long term, that tells you how confident I am about Etihad's potential on their African routes. Of course, execution is another story, and Etihad has a long track record of, snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. And as long as they don't do that again, I think they'll probably be okay. So yeah, I am very optimistic about Etihad's plans for Africa.
I love it, because I'm sure a lot of people who are listeners to the podcast, we've talked and criticized some of the decisions that have made over the last 30 episodes, and I think that's why I think you're always objective when it comes to these routes, and I think it's fascinating the different ways that you guys look at this, and we've talked about this before about an art versus a science, and being bold versus doing the easy things. Right, so Behramjee, I'm going to give you 60 seconds and no more to respond to Sean. Please keep it short, and then we can take it offline because we need to get on with the other topics. But give us, I think you've finished your main course now, so you can probably go. Yeah, I see the questions coming, so thanks for those too. 60 seconds, Behramjee, go.
I think the one part which I agree with Sean is the potential in Lumbashi for Etihad, considering the lack of competition. On the other points, especially what he said on Accra and outside Kinshasa to Dubai demand, I think it'll be a bit of a stretch for Etihad, especially on the Accra route. Kinshasa, I still believe that they should start with the 321 LR, maybe with higher frequency. But Lumbashi, I'm sure, has potential. Though one thing, Sean said about Harare to London, keep in mind, since it's a triangle routing, the Harare passenger will have a 2-stop itinerary to London, not a 1-stop itinerary. Though I know pricing is the main indicator for that, but still, psychologically, some passengers may be put off by that and transiting in the Middle East. Maybe not, but you still have Kenya Airways also as a competitor on that route from the UK. So let's see. We're still 1 year away, so Etihad has enough time to reflect and to plan accordingly. So yeah, another thing which Sean and I forgot to mention is that all the aircraft that are being used for these routes is a 300-seater aircraft for every single route. If they're a smaller aircraft size like a 787-8, maybe that could have been a bit better, but they also can't talk about that. No point talking about that. Yeah.
No, that's fair. Good
no,
point.
but Behramjee, I don't think that is as much of a problem as I don't think that's as much of a problem as you outlined, because these are markets that they're going into on the basis of volume in these markets. So having lower unit costs with the 787-9 is probably more of an advantage than a disadvantage as far as they're concerned. So I don't think I think even if they had smaller aircraft available, the unit cost and the ability to compete on price is actually going to be more critical for them in these markets than anything else. I said these are markets which they're choosing for particular reasons, and I think one of those key reasons is volume at low yield.
Okay, right. Let's leave it there, Behramjee. We're going to leave it there, and we're going to come back to this, I'm sure, before they launch next year. We'll do another deep dive into it. Who knows? We might even be able to entice Etihad to come on and have this conversation and give their thoughts. We'll see. The invitation is always there. Right. Just a quick update.
They're starting off with they're coming to AviaDev. They're commenting on our LinkedIn posts now, about their expansion and stuff. So they're definitely engaging with AviaDev. So Urian, shout out to you. Arik, shout out to you. Mark, shout out to you. I know the three of you are probably listening, and if you want to come on a podcast, drop John a line, and we'd love to see you on.
We'll make it happen. Right. Just a quick one now, which is just a quick update on Uganda Airlines, because we covered them in detail the last couple of months. But there is some good news with an A330 coming back into the fleet. So Sean, give us what's the latest as we stand on the 22nd of April. We're making moves in the right direction after obviously the ACMI of the 787 from Ethiopian.
Well, yes, they've had their two Airbus 330-800 NEOs both grounded since February 19th. CRN has been grounded She's a long-term one. She's been grounded since January, and that's got Rolls-Royce engine issues. NIL also had engine issues, but this was a failed borescope. So this was one that was targeted to return to service. It was targeted to return to service mid-March. That has stretched, obviously, into mid-April. But as of the 17th of April, she has returned to service and flew one rotation, Entebbe to Dubai on the 17th, and since then has been parked again. In the meanwhile, the Ethiopian 7878 ASI has continued to be operating their standard schedule of 3 weekly Gatwick Entebbe and 2 weekly Entebbe Mumbai. Now, I will make this comment because I've had a lot of friends. I still have a lot of friends at Uganda Airlines, but something which I have found they have resorted to in the last week or two, since the change in their commercial department, it looks like, has been false advertising. And this is something which really gets my goat, because we've identified they've been advertising direct flights from Lagos to Mumbai. And when confronted with this, so I've got pictures of their advertising through their official channels, and I spoke to their office in Nigeria saying, guys, is this a direct flight? And they're like, yes. And I'm like, so what's the schedule? And they're like, well, it goes from Lagos to Entebbe, and then after 6 hours, you continue Entebbe. And I'm like, that's not direct. And they're like, oh, but all airlines go through the hub. It's like direct. And when I said that I'm actually, you're false advertising, they actually laughed. They put a little laugh emoji in the chat. Like, go ahead, report us to whatever. So I have actually filed an official complaint with Nigeria's Civil Aviation Authority and with the Indian DGCA. And I sincerely hope that the authorities take this complaint seriously, because it is absolutely unethical to put this kind of false advertising out there. And Uganda Airlines and their new commercial department, you should be ashamed of yourselves for trying shit like this. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Tell us what you really think. Thank you very much. But yeah, very good point.
And I know they're listening. I know they're listening. So that goes to you. I'm not naming names, but you know who you are.
Okay. Gotcha. Right. Let's leave that one there. And we no doubt will be covering what else is going on with Uganda Airlines. Thank you, everybody, for your comments and questions. Obviously, we will get to these, but of course, it's great if we're commenting on the stuff that's being talked about. There's a few things in there that are general conversation stuff that I'm sure Behramjee and Sean will love to get their teeth into, but we've got a set of objectives and topics we want to kind of get through. So I'm going to come back to you. Actually, Sean, I'm going to start with you with the next one, and then Behramjee, because you both got stuff to say on this. It's an airline I don't think we've ever talked about before, which is Salamair. Maybe I'm wrong. In 30 episodes, maybe we have, but they are an LCC operating out of Oman, and they're expanding to Mogadishu. That's why I want to come to you, because of course your experience and your history with Mogadishu from the 3rd of September, twice a week, but also Kigali as well. I also wanted to come to you, Sean, because you might be able to. I remember the CEO very well from a previous airline, Fly Africa, right? In Zim and South Africa. That was Adrian, right? Adrian Hamilton Mans. He was the man behind Fly Africa. So
have had, yeah. Yep.
So yeah, just interested because there's obviously an association with the CEO with Africa, but talk about Salamair and talk about their route expansions.
Okay, so we'd heard that Oman Air had been looking at flights to Kigali. I think we discussed it a few months ago. The interesting thing which has now come up is that the government of Oman has just completed an acquisition of the majority stake in Salamair. So Salamair is now 90% owned by the government of Oman, and consequently it has effectively become the low-cost arm of Oman Air, which is also owned obviously by the government of Oman. And I think that is something that is relevant over here, because while Oman Air was supposed to have started flights to Kigali and then backed out of it without really, they didn't really formally announce or whatever. There was a visit by the Sultan of Oman, I believe, to Kigali Kigali or vice versa. But Oman has been making a lot of strategic moves into Africa. Traditionally, Oman's moves in Africa have been primarily constrained to Tanzania and Zanzibar, obviously, because of the historical ties there. But we've seen Oman and Botswana have had a major strategic partnership in recent times. Oman is trying to do the same thing with Rwanda. And I mean, I understand Oman and Malawi have had a bunch of strategic discussions as well. So Oman is making moves in this area. And I think, the Kigali flight, while it may not actually be there to actually cater to existing demand, because the numbers are really, really low. I mean, we're talking below 10,000 a year in OD. It's something that, because this is now going to be a state-owned airline, that may have a bit more of a strategic reason for it. Mogadishu, on the other hand, is a slam dunk. And, I'll say this. One of my favorite stories, I think I may even have mentioned this on the podcast before, one of our big money makers when we were in Mogadishu was the export of halal goat carcasses to Muscat. And,
I remember the stories of doing it on the ramp, right? That was what you were told us about.
Exactly.
Murder on the ramp.
Back in the day, exporting goat meat from Somalia into Muscat was big money. I mean, we would fly cargo in from the UAE into Somalia, and then our back leg would be to take seafood and goats to live seafood, dead goats to Muscat, and that continues to be something that's in there. There's cargo aircraft that fly that weekly. They fly to Salalah and to Muscat, and a scheduled flight twice weekly with an Airbus. This is not a long flight. I mean, we're talking about 3 hours max to from Oman. I don't see this as missing. I think that the UAE, the Middle East to Somalia in general is a underserved route. It's an overpriced route, and for an LCC type operator to come in there and maybe, even just to compete at existing prices would be good, but to come in and actually offer a potential low cost option into there, it's well worth a shot. So I'm optimistic on Mogadishu from a commercial aspect. I think that their Rwanda route will fail from a commercial standpoint, but as a state-owned airline now, does that really make a difference to them?
Absolutely. Right, let me bring you in, Behramjee. I have unmuted you, so over to you for your thoughts on Salamair. Do you agree with what Sean said?
Yes, I do. Especially in the fact that there's Kigali will be a big failure. Operating a 321 into Kigali, which has very, very little demand into India and Asia to feed Oman and via Muscat. Plus the point-to-point between Oman and Rwanda is next to nothing. Even I will not be surprised if Kigali does not get launched eventually and gets cancelled before the launch date. As Sean mentioned, Somalia has a bit of potential because of the lack of competition into Mogadishu. So you might get passengers also feeding Oman Air's network from Europe and Asia into Somalia, which will help a little bit, especially with the diaspora in Europe, the UK in particular. But yeah, Kigali, no chance. Kigali will be a failure for sure.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, well, let's watch and see. It's a bit of a new airline from my perspective, but I think that's really fascinating with what's going on in Oman, and the Mogadishu side is all good. So let me stay with you, Behramjee, for our next topic, which is ASKY. So ASKY Airlines are growing their fleet, as we know, because I've had data from the commercial team. We know that Asias, the CEO, is an avid listener and watcher of the podcast as well. So hi to you guys. And again, another airline that will be with us at AviaDev in June. But they are growing their footprint in the region. So we teased the idea of them having a new destination. And can you sort of give us some ideas as to where this might be and when it might happen?
Yes, it came to my notice by pure coincidence as I was flying ASKY on Sunday from Lomé to Douala. And as usual, I like reading the in-flight magazine as it has quite a good amount of content, both from a commercial point of view as well as from an operational point of view. And I always read the CEO's letter at the start of the magazine because it gives few hints regarding their future plans. And over there, he clearly mentions that Kanu will be the next destination that ASKY will be launching. I've not seen any official announcement of that in any other print media form, but in the In-Flight magazine it was clearly there, and I took a screenshot of it also to be safe, in case someone questions me. With regards to Kanu's potential for ASKY, because it's a pan-African carrier connecting nearly all the major markets, I feel it will do well for ASKY. The yields will be good. There's no other West African carrier flying into Kanu. Where Kanu will be successful for them is that if, because they do a freedom tag, they definitely tag Kanu either N'Djamena or Niamey, because those are the two big international markets from there. They connect very well Lomé to Accra. So, and not be a daily service to begin with. They will start the usual 2 or 3 or 4 weekly flights to get a gauge of the market and to see how things progress. So yeah, it's a short flight from Lomé. They will have a monopoly on Niamey and N'Djamena if they do decide to exercise for freedom traffic rights on those routes. And the yields are very good for them over here. So I definitely do think it's a slam dunk for them.
Great, awesome. Right, Sean, your thoughts on this? You agree with that?
For the most part, I do agree. And again, just to do some plugging of AviaDev in Botswana, I will be moderating a panel discussion where Marshall from ASKY will be one of the participants talking about new potential routes from Africa. And this is something which is actually interesting because when I saw that thing from Behramjee and then I looked in terms of what the markets, the large markets from Kano are, this is what came up and which I found interesting given what some of the things ASKY said before. The largest market from Kano far and away is Saudi Arabia, 225,000 passengers between Jeddah, Medina, Riyadh, etc. In fact, closer to 50,000, followed by Cairo, which is an interesting one. Then Dubai, Beirut, Guangzhou, Addis, London. And I mean, now we're talking, 4 digits, and so nothing really significant. Cairo is one that I'm very interested in because that is 30,000 passengers a year. Egypt Air obviously serves that route. But it is something that ASKY in the past has talked about when they said, what kind of long-haul expansion could you do with 737 MAXs? Cairo via somewhere has been a route that they had discussed and mentioned in the past. I think it was Marshall mentioned it. I can't remember what interview. It might have been, I can't for the life of me remember whether it was actually even an interview or in a chat with him somewhere. But it's something that they have mentioned before. When you now look in terms of Kano and Cairo, that is something that could potentially make sense for them, where they could look at obviously launching Kano to begin with, potentially with the N'Djamena or a Niamey or one of the other Sahel routes tagged on for now. But in the longer term, look in terms of going Kano to Cairo, even Kano to Jeddah as a extension with a max, because Kano to Cairo is not that long a haul. I mean, we're talking about 3.5, 4 hours max, and Jeddah about the same. So this is something that could make a lot of sense. And if they're starting to get into that region and look at it as a potential stepping stone into the Middle East and North Africa, it's a logical step because ASKY has reached the limit of where they can grow in West Africa. They are serving every single country and every single market in West Africa already. Now they're beginning to look at these tertiary cities, not even the secondary cities. Now we're looking at tertiary cities. So you'll be looking at places like Kano, places like Kumasi, places like, they're already doing Nouakchott. Maybe they'll look at Nouadhibou, stuff like that. But pretty much, if there's a runway, they can take a 737 in most of these countries in West Africa. They're already flying there, or they will be flying there soon enough. And I think Kano is a very interesting one because of it opens up a completely different demographic and type of market, which is the Sahel to the Middle East and North Africa. And I think that even though they may not have said that directly, patching together little bits and pieces of what they've said elsewhere, I think just raises a question, and if it hasn't raised a question, I will send my consulting invoice because it is a market you should be looking at in the future.
Well, Behramjee.
There's a problem, Sean, regarding Kanu, Cairo, and Kanu Jeddah's bilateral access. Egypt Air will never
Cairo shouldn't be.
permit them.
Cairo shouldn't be. Cairo shouldn't be, and I think Cairo, because of the YD and everything else, they will have the ability to get traffic right. I think where they may be obstructed on Cairo is the state of Egypt and Ethiopia relations right now, where it's unlikely that Egypt will do any favors to an airline that is so heavily controlled by Ethiopia. So I think that may be the issue, but there's nothing in, I mean, they're all YD signatories, they're all SATAM signatories. There's absolutely no reason why they shouldn't be allowing intra-African fifth freedom rights. But yeah, I think that is going to be a challenge. That's probably why they're talking about Kano right now without talking about Cairo right now, while they have mentioned Cairo in the past.
Yeah, it's a good test for SATAM and for AFCAC, right? Let's see whether they can make that happen.
Even Kanu Jeddah getting fifth freedom would be a monumental task.
Kano Jeddah, yeah. No, I don't disagree. There's going to be a lot of challenges for Jeddah, but never say never. I think Jeddah via Kano will be. I think there's a lot of potential for that, and I think we're seeing increasingly that Saudi Arabia from sub-Saharan Africa is a growth market, and I think, the smarter airlines will look at it sooner rather than later and not wait for Riyadh Air or whichever other entity from Saudi Arabia comes into their markets. They would want to be proactive about it.
All right, great. Let's leave that one there and we will watch and see when that is actually announced. But great spotting, Behramjee, reading on your flight and reading the in-flight mags. It's good to know. Right, let's move to the east side of Africa and to those beautiful warm waters. We did notice that Air Mauritius were doing some advertising using this, and I did ask Behramjee if he is now their head of marketing to talk about the wonderful warm waters of the Indian Ocean. But actually, I want to do a big shout out for Jim Lau from our brilliant partner Aero Routes here. He spotted that Turkish are increasing direct flights from 4 to 7 per week from Istanbul to Mauritius from June 2026. That is alongside 3 that already serve the island via Madagascar. So taking it from 7 frequencies to 10 frequencies a week. I believe that's right, Sean. So pretty straightforward, this one. Just a sort of, something to do with the network. They've got the thing, or no, you've got something interesting that is particularly fascinating to say.
I think this is exactly one of those opportunistic moves which is becoming quite prevalent across the board, because a big chunk of European market to Mauritius has been coming through Dubai. And as I mentioned before, a lot of these insurance companies in Europe and the UK are not able to insure passengers traveling through the Middle Eastern hubs. So Turkish sees that opportunity where tour operators offering Mauritius traffic can no longer sell it over Dubai. And remember, Emirates to Mauritius was running multiple daily 380s, I think, at its peak. So, when you look at that, I think Turkish is just seeing the opportunity that Emirates is in a vulnerable position. So why not double down and see what we can win away from the European markets? And I think that is a very, very smart move.
No, makes sense. Yeah, I'm lucky me. I'm going to Mauritius in July. I'll be flying with Discover, our airline partner for AviaDev. So that's an interesting flight because it stops off in Seychelles on the way. And who knows, maybe they'll decouple that as well in time. So Behramjee, you want to talk to us about those beautiful warm waters? Come on, talk to us.
Yes, going to Mauritius has actually been on my bucket list for the last decade, actually. So I hope to go there sometime soon.
Because of the warm water.
And also there's the Intercontinental Resort over there, which I've been eyeing for many years. The pictures look so good, that particular resort. I don't know why.
And they do good pizza here.
No, that I know they don't have over there.
I bet it's not bad.
Okay. With regards to Turkish and Mauritius, what Sean initially said is 100% correct. They're looking to take advantage of the volatility of the Gulf hubs. Right now, only from the Gulf hubs, Saudi and Emirates fly into Mauritius. And Saudi has been, in the past 2 years, taking a lot of transit traffic from Europe. And Emirates also is a big player on that route, getting Europe transit traffic. So Turkish, with their frequency increase up to 10 times a week, will now be in a stronger position to get passengers to fly via Istanbul instead. Some historical figures. In 2023, Turkish carried just over 100,000 passengers into Mauritius from all over Europe and Istanbul. That increased by 40% in 2024. They went up to over 140,000 passengers as they increased their frequencies also in 2024. I don't have the 2025 updated numbers as yet, so I can't mention that. But yeah, I definitely see this being a strong point for them to also feed their France and UK network better, because the main market for Mauritius is France and the UK in terms of volume, followed by Italy, Switzerland, and Germany. Just for statistical context, sorry, the top 10 markets that fed Turkish Airlines the last year on the Mauritius route were Milan, Istanbul point to point, Prague, Rome, Helsinki, Bucharest, Berlin, Lyon, and Paris, in that ranking order. So
Yeah, and you know what? I'm going to mention something else as well. And I think that this is not going to be just Turkish which is seeing this, because I've also seen, and this is just random stuff which tends to pop up on social media on my Instagram feed at times, is I'm seeing increasingly passengers traveling even via India to Mauritius from the UK, where they're being rebooked onto London, Mumbai, Mauritius, and stuff like that. And I think it's interesting because Mauritius obviously doubled down on their partnership with Emirates in terms of creating the feed, and now that is beginning to bite them. This is a country who has historically blocked Ethiopian Airlines in particular from getting traffic rights to fly there. And from conversations with people at Ethiopian over the last couple of months, I mean, of course, Ethiopian never counts chickens before they hatch. They know the real politic of things, but they say that they're more optimistic about getting traffic rights to Mauritius now than they've been in a very long time. And I think that might be something else we may see in the Mauritius market if they realize that they are better off with Ethiopian inside the tent than outside the tent. I think that'll be a very beneficial thing for the Mauritius market overall, because it will reduce their dependence on the Gulf carriers. I think certainly there have been reasons why Mauritius has not wanted to promote Ethiopian. They feel that Ethiopian, historically, they have said that Ethiopian potentially can bring them a larger proportion of antisocial and criminal elements from sub-Saharan Africa, which they obviously worry about Mauritius. I think that's more a function of their inability to screen people at their own gateways than a function of anything that Ethiopian will do, because I think Ethiopian would actually create a ready-made feed from European markets to them that can hedge their bet in case of a prolonged weakness of the Gulf hubs, which have provided probably over 50% of their feed into Mauritius in recent years.
Yep, absolutely. So watch and see, but thank you for the analysis on that. Right, we've got 5 or 6 things to get through. We've got about 20 minutes left for the podcast, so we'll rattle through. The first one for you, Sean, is to talk about Air Tanzania. So Air Tanzania, of course, we talked about this last month, about them launching Dar es Salaam to Seychelles. So we do have a little video to play.
To Seychelles.
Yes, or not. So we're going to play a little video. I apologize for what happens to Sean's head in this video, but hopefully it will make you all smile, and then we can reflect and react to it. So here we go.
The only hope I've got for this is that they just, on April 4th, say, you were going to the Seychelles? April Fools, and that's going to be the only way they can salvage and make sense out of this. Because if they do that, it'll be the funniest April Fool's prank that any airline anywhere has ever done. It's not like they're going to inconvenience passengers, because I doubt those 2 passengers a day are ever going to have actually booked that flight. So there's not going to be anyone booked on that damn flight. They're just going to say April Fools, and that will be hilarious. And if they actually do that, I will give them humongous props for having the best sense of humor. But that is the only thing I can find as a silver lining here. That is the only thing. This whole thing is just one big April Fool's joke.
All right.
Was I right or was I right?
But they've got a new date.
They've got
It's
a new
coming.
date, so now we have May Fools coming up. Yep, 3rd of May is when they're planning to do it, or at least according to ChatGPT, because they have been posting on LinkedIn with ChatGPT-generated prompts for their text. I think someone shared a Air Tanzania blurb that we are going to be restarting to Seychelles on the 3rd of May, etc., etc. And do you like this prompt, or would you like us to generate another LinkedIn-ready prompt for you? So yes, we do appreciate that. This route, I mean, every bit of analysis that we did last month still holds true. It is going to be a disaster. It may be less of a disaster because now they have 10 days of lead time to sell rather than 3 days of lead time to sell. That does not change the fact that, you know, you can put as much lipstick as you want on a pig. It is still a pig, and pigs are not halal. And that is the reality. So yeah, ain't gonna happen. They may fly it. They fly a lot of routes that make no sense to me. They may fly a lot of routes that make no sense to anybody. So I've stopped trying to analyze why they do things. Let's just roll with it and, you know, laugh at it.
And obviously, on a serious note, you know, Seychelles is really suffering as well from the Middle East feed too, you know, so they're desperate for service, and, you know, this airline says we're going to provide it. So
what service does Air Tanzania bring? What does Air Tanzania bring them? Air Tanzania is
it's
banned from the
something
EU.
to
It's
hold
not
on
like
to.
they're suddenly going to launch. It's nothing to hold on to. If your recovery, your tourism strategy hinges upon Air Tanzania suddenly, you know, becoming serious about the way things go, you're deeper in a hole than you ever want to be. Please, even if you are Tanzania, don't put your hopes on Air Tanzania to improve your tourism sector. It is a losing proposition. This has been proven time and time again. Please, people, I beg of you, if you are an airline, if you are an airport, if you're a tourism industry, do not take these basket cases of airlines seriously. Do not build your businesses upon them. They are bad news for themselves, they're bad news for their taxpayers, and they will be bad news for you if you do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Amen. Okay. Right. Behramjee, let me come to you. You can give us some feedback on that if you wish, but also let's talk about Ethiopian. Every month for 30 months, we've talked about Ethiopian. So there's 2 things in the news with Ethiopian. So they're firmed up orders for 787s, 6 extra 787s, and a Moscow increase as well. So talk to us. Do you want anything to say on Air Tanzania? Has it all been said by Sean? And then talk to us about Ethiopia.
Sean forgot to mention one more positive thing about Seychelles routes by Tanzania is that they're going to be launching it with A220 and not a 787.
That's positive. How is that positive in any way, shape, or form? It's just less negative, but it's not positive. There's nothing about this that is positive, Behramjee. They could run a bloody Dash 8 turboprop and it wouldn't be positive.
Right, let's move on from that one. Let's go to Ethiopian, Behramjee.
Yes, so Ethiopian announced that they firmed up 6 options that they had previously with Boeing for 77-9s, and they've clarified that these 6 additional airframes are not to be used for replacement of older aircraft. They'll be used to expand their network in the 2030 decade, which makes sense. They've also announced that Moscow flights are being increased to 6 times a week from the present 5, also using a 77-8 though. The reason for Moscow being increased is because of increased demand from Moscow into primarily the East African beach cities of Zanzibar, Mombasa, etc., as well as increased amount of demand from from Moscow into South Africa. A lot of Africans to fight their war in Ukraine. So that is, why Sean laughing? I actually,
I'm not quite sure that is why Ethiopia is increasing Moscow
no,
service,
I
but
know.
okay.
But yeah, but there is a bit of update. I flew on an Egypt Air flight from Douala to Cairo 2 years ago, and there were quite a few Cameroonians heading to Moscow. Half of them were women, half of them were men. A couple of the ladies I was chatting to as they were sitting next to me, and they said they were all going there basically for domestic help purposes. But the men were, I could tell the men were mainly going there for military service. They were not going there just to fool around or do anything. Anyways,
Yeah,
getting back to
it's been a big story for sure. I've seen a lot of coverage.
Yeah,
about these things. But
16 Cameroonians officially announced killed in the conflict by Russia last month. So it's gotten a lot of headlines over there. But anyways, getting back to the main topic, demand from Moscow, especially in the winter season, has increased. Plus, in general, due to lack of competition from Moscow into Africa, Ethiopia does get a lot of traffic from there, as well as they get a lot of traffic connecting from Moscow via Addis into South America, North America, as well as Asia. Especially now with the Middle East hubs having a detrimental effect due to the war in Iran. So I don't see any problem for Ethiopian to fill these flights up to a reasonable degree. Plus cargo as well will be fine in both directions.
Yeah. You agree, Sean? Pretty
No,
straightforward.
I think that's pretty much it. The Middle East, the displacement of traffic from the Middle Eastern hubs. Obviously, the Russians, while they're involved in one war, they don't want to be involved in the second war, so they are avoiding that just like everybody else is, and consequently, that traffic is being displaced elsewhere. And Behramjee is right. There's a huge amount of traffic from sub-Saharan Africa through Addis into Moscow. If you're there in the evenings, in particular, when all the African flights land, and you're at the Gold Track security checkpoint in Addis, so that's where the Cloud9 diplomats and Starline's gold passengers get to go through security, you will find that probably at any given time, a significant number of Russian diplomatic couriers are there, and you see them with their Russian diplomatic passports, and they're wheeling. They actually have these trolleys worth of diplomatic sacks, which, they don't go through security screening. They just bring them to the VIP line, flash the diplomatic paperwork, and just go around the machines. And I've probably seen that maybe a dozen or more times at Addis in the evenings, the days they have the Moscow flights. So there's a significant volume of that, just the diplomatic couriers themselves. I mean, that's probably about 10 to 15 business class seats straight up there for them. So that's good money for Ethiopian on this Moscow route just from that business alone.
Yep. These little nuances. There's so many things we talked about: murdering goats, and sending recruits to armies, and diplomatic ties and politics. That's what's so rich tapestry. It's not all positive, but it's super interesting what drives our industry. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. Behramjee, let me come back to you on the next one. Go on.
I just want to add one bit thing more on Ethiopian, which we hadn't actually discussed in the show notes, but it just cropped up to me. One thing we've actually seen in the last few days, last week or so, has been Ethiopians' slow but steady restoration of their Middle Eastern services. So, they had cut back on their Dubai flights to just one daily max by daytime. That has now gone back to 2 daily flights to Dubai. They're operating ET600 on the night bank and ET602 on the day bank, both with wide bodies now. And since the 11th, they've actually moved their Abu Dhabi and Sharjah flights, which they had moved on to daytime flights. They have now moved back to the traditional night bank to be properly fed by the full African network. So I think that's a very interesting move, because that just shows a bit more of the normalization. Certainly, we're not back up to we're not in a state where that fourth daily is now going to come live as it was supposed to in a few weeks' time. But the fact that it's gone from, Dubai has gone from one max just a month ago to now 2 daily wide bodies plus Sharjah and Abu Dhabi as well, just shows that this market, at least the O&D between Africa and Dubai, Africa and the UAE in general, has rebounded pretty much immediately once the active hostilities in the UAE have calmed down relatively. So, when they're not drones falling on Dubai, the Africans are ready to go and do business.
Yeah. Great point. Thank you for bringing that up. Right, Behramjee, let's talk about Air Congo, because they were obviously on the podcast last week and last month even. March was the month of their new route. So what's the latest? How's it going and what's happened?
Well, Air Congo, in a blaze of glory, unfortunately announced massive regional expansion to many cities in Central and Eastern Africa, as well as Johannesburg. And they were very buoyed. The decision makers of Air Congo were very buoyed, seeing what they were experiencing on domestic load factors, not understanding that the domestic Congo market is completely different from the international Congo market in that part of Africa. To begin with, the volume apart from Johannesburg is not available for those other markets, and using a 737 MAX 8 or even a normal Dash 800 is too risky, even though if it's via another city to get for freedom traffic rights. As expected, all majority of the regional routes so far that have been launched have failed. They've cut already Cotonou and Douala within just 2 weeks of launching it, which was expected. Entebbe was also cut, but now it's being rerouted via another city using a Q400. Johannesburg is still operating via Lubumbashi with a 737-8. But yeah, if I was advising Air Congo, I would tell them to look at how Ethiopian started their African expansion 25 years ago, and to take advantage of Brazzaville Fifth Freedom traffic, which is close by, because Brazzaville to Central Africa and West Africa is much higher in volume. And if they fly two-stop services to certain cities in West Africa via Brazzaville, at least they'll get some bumps on the seats. But flying from Kinshasa also has another problem. It does not give visas on arrival to a lot of African passport holders, whereas Brazzaville does offer visa on arrival to all Central African citizens, and getting a Brazzaville visa is far easier than getting a Kinshasa visa. So I would just advise the people at Air Congo to be a bit more prudent. The domestic market is completely different. You enjoy a virtual monopoly on that segment. Take advantage of those segments but more so, and control your eagerness on expanding regionally. You rather first look at international markets like Brussels and Shanghai to feed those regional markets. Because if you can launch both those at the same time, that would probably help, because then Paris and Brussels can feed the regional markets better. But that should take at least 1 more year, because they need to first consolidate their local presence.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Thank you for that. Sean, go on.
I think Behramjee is being a little condescending by telling Air Congo to learn from Ethiopian, considering that the people running Air Congo are from Ethiopian, so they will learn from themselves. I mean, their CEO is Mesfin Biru, who's had a very long career at Ethiopian, including prior to this, their, I think, regional director for France and Francophone Europe. So, I mean, they've got a lot of experience. They know what they're doing. I think one of the reasons why they've had to make these cuts is one of their two 737s has been AOG for the last 10 days, give or take. I spotted it in Addis last week, sitting there with one engine missing. So that is 9 Sierra Alpha Oscar Alpha. And I think, that has made a significant dent in their ability to serve the entire regional schedule, that very ambitious regional schedule, which was not realistic that they announced. But also remember that, Air Congo is one of two government-linked national airlines. This is the one that's actually flying and is professional. There's also Congo Airways, which has not flown in 4 months and has no planes, but has a large number of staff who are threatening to go on strike. And I guess, how do you go on strike if you're not actually flying? I mean, I'm not quite sure how that works, but anyway, they're threatening to go on strike if something or the other does. I don't know. I just saw some article about that. But the bottom line is, a lot of moves that they're taking are probably political. They need to grab the traffic rights for these routes to avoid designations lapsing and things as such. So I don't doubt for a moment that they did not have the expectation of this big bang of routes. They're not Etihad. They're not capable of pulling off a big bang like this for it. They announced them, and in all likelihood, the announcement was something to do with grabbing the traffic rights or defending, their designations, domestic politics, or whatever else was the reason. So, I think Air Congo is already one of the most professionally run Congolese airlines in recent memory, and given that they've only been around for a few months, I think that already says a lot about the other Congolese airlines in history, and I've got a lot of optimism for what they can eventually deliver. So, I think that regional thing, don't judge them by that, the regional expansion, so to speak. Remember that a lot of that was probably done for reasons other than the potential commercial success.
Yeah, and I agree with you.
Which was assassinated by losing one of the 737s.
Yes, of course. I agree. I think it's one of the most exciting markets. We keep talking about, that entire region there as being sort of a sleeping giant, and obviously it really is going to show some of that, and Ethiopian have seen that opportunity with Air Congo. Fantastic. Right, we got about 5 minutes to go, and 3 big topics still to discuss. The first one is SAA. So this is going to be tricky in the time we got. We can give it a little bit, we can stay on a little bit longer for those watching. We had a few high-profile resignations and departures from the airline over the last month or so, and this is all in the fallout from an auditor's report. So, Sean, give us the lowdown on what happened and some of the context.
What happened? Well, South African Airways delivered their financial statements. The financial statements were disclaimed by the Auditor General's Department, who said that the financial statements did not meet adequate standards for the last 7 years, actually. South African Airways claimed to have turned a profit, which I think everybody has subsequently, if not debunked, definitely poked holes into, because a bulk of their income has come about due to the sale of a single pair of Heathrow slots to Qatar Airways, a transaction that actually occurred around May, June last year, and that we had been requested not to talk about on the podcast by both Qatar and SAA, and which we were unable to corroborate the rumors at the time, now turns out to have been true. And I think that is the only reason why South African Airways was able to show a profit this year. Additionally, their cash flow was very poor, and their cash flow was boosted by approximately 1 billion rand in additional new shares, which were issued to their 100% shareholder. Now, of course, this raises question as to why you would want to do it that way. And the answer to that is, remember, this is a company that came out of business rescue not so long ago. And part of the terms of the business rescue was that any bailout would obviously have to then be looked at in terms of the creditors who took a significant loss on or write down on their debt owed by South African Airways. So they are entering a very, very tricky legal quagmire here. I think that I would not be surprised to see an organization like UTA, which is the Organization for Undoing Tax Abuse. who are a NGO in South Africa that is very active in these kind of tax and financial shenanigan exposures. Amabungane, another one of the South African organizations, Daily Maverick. I mean, we're seeing a lot of this stuff coming out into the open now. As a result, the chief financial officer took early retirement, and immediately thereafter, the chief executive officer resigned, not with immediate effect. He resigns effective the end of the month. The head of Air Chefs, their catering subsidiary, has been appointed as the acting chief executive officer, and effectively they're in a position right now where their backs are really, really against the wall. Their financial statements have been poor. The political winds seem to have turned against them. The entire narrative that, oh, everything's going hunky-dory, we're profitable, and, you know, it's all going to be okay. I think even their most ardent believers are no longer trumpeting that line. It is very much the emperor's new clothes. People have jumped on a bandwagon, and they're jumping off that bandwagon right now. And I sincerely hope they're able to figure something out and be sensible. I think the decisions they've actually taken and in the way they've implemented, I've said this many times before, they probably shouldn't have restarted after business rescue, but once they did, the decisions they actually took have been sensible. It is the stuff that's happening in the background, which is increasing their costs and everything else, which have not been so smart. And here's a shout out to our friends there, to Teboho, the CCO, to Emmanuel from Network. The guys who are going to be with us in Botswana in a few weeks' time. Hang in there, guys. We hope you're going to succeed, but we hope you succeed without costing the taxpayer another arm and a leg, because you've already cost the taxpayer billions. And it's not your fault personally, but yeah, at the end of the day, you do have to live with that.
Absolutely. Right, let's quickly get on to Kenya Airways as well, because they've been in the news as well, and these two often go hand in hand. So again, just run us through what the story is here with the ownership and how it impacts the bailout rules over there in Kenya, because I think you're pretty clued up and you've been commenting on this as well, Sean.
Sorry, I lost the sound for a second.
Oh, did you?
But
Kenya Airways.
Yeah, the oops. All right, hold on. Okay, yeah. The Kenya Airways situation, sort of Kenya Airways situation as much as the Kenya situation. Kenya's Civil Aviation Authority has recently propagated new regulations that restrict the ability of government to provide subsidies or financial assistance to state-owned airlines going forward. Now, as I said in an interview with Kenyan publications last week, there's a lot of places in the world which have regulations like that. In fact, anyone who signed up to SATAM or the YD has already signed up to regulations like that. And lip service is often not even paid to things like that. The governments do what the governments do, because at the end of the day, when the only enforcement mechanism against you breaking the law is you yourself, we've seen people like Donald Trump, people like Rwanda, people like all over the world, who act with impunity, notwithstanding the laws they signed up to. So I do not expect this makes much of a difference. There are carve-outs in case of national interest or, macroeconomic stability and all those other kind of things. I think, the government of Kenya will do what the government of Kenya is going to do, notwithstanding this. I don't think it's going to make any difference, but I also don't think it's going to result in a bailout for Kenya Airways, because if the government of Kenya has not bailed out Kenya Airways over the last 2 years, which they really haven't, it's not likely they're going to start doing it now right after propagating a regulation prohibiting it.
Yeah, fair enough. Behramjee, anything to add on SAA? We're getting some feedback from you, Sean. I think some. No, it's gone now. You said.
No, nothing from my side.
All right, perfect. So our final topic is a quick rumor mill, which was following a visit by the CEO of Airpeace to.
John, your voice is echoing.
Yeah, I can hear it.
Yeah, I had a problem with my sound, so I've had to switch to area mic. So you'll get a slight echo on this, unfortunately.
I tell you what, I'll mute you while I'm talking. Let's do that. Ooh, what's going on? I've muted you, Sean, so now we shouldn't get the feedback, so that'd be great. So yeah, the quick rumor mill was Airpeace. The CEO, Alan Onyema, was on a visit to this new airport they built up in Ogun, I believe it is, and said, we've got this fantastic piece of infrastructure. I think we should start flying to London, I think was the quote. This was covered, and they're also launching the Caribbean flights. I believe that isn't just a rumor mill; that is happening. But they're coming back. So, Sean, do you want to? You're sort of our Airpeace watcher, unless Behramjee's got something particularly exciting to say on this.
No, Airpeace is indeed. Has indeed said that they intend to start service between the new Gateway International Airport in Ogun State and London Heathrow. We have seen stuff on social media, although not from an official Airpeace channel, that this is supposedly going to replace their Saturday the Saturday Abuja to Heathrow flight will be replaced now by an Ogun to Heathrow flight. The traffic between Ogun and London in 2025 was zero because the airport did not exist at the time. Ogun is basically halfway between Lagos and Ibadan, and effectively it's a North Lagos airport. I mean, as far as distance and everything goes. Could it make sense? No. There is no situation whatsoever that any right-minded human being could justify using a slot for Ogun to Heathrow in lieu of Abuja to Heathrow. I cannot say much more on this. Unfortunately, the chief commercial officer at Airpeace, a friend of ours, a friend of the show, he's not talking to me right now ever since he threatened to sue me. So yeah, that's another story for another day. But yes, and that brings us to part two of the question you asked, which is the Caribbean flights, which is why Airpeace has been threatening to sue me. Airpeace has announced that their on again, off again Caribbean flights, which they said we're going to restart, and which I said made no sense to restart. Those are now actually loaded in the system to commence on the 24th. So Sunday, the 24th of May, to fly Lagos, Bridgetown, Antigua. So Lagos, Barbados, Antigua, overnight in Antigua. So it leaves like 2 a.m. from Lagos, gets there about 9 in the morning. Then the next day it leaves from there, again, Antigua, Bridgetown, Lagos. It will run twice a month on the last 2 Sundays of each month until July. Probably the strangest ever schedule that an airline has announced. The seats are not available for sale right now, although the flights are loaded in their booking engine. My thoughts on this are, as always, this is probably more illogical than their proposed Ogun to Heathrow flights. At least Ogun to Heathrow is a North Lagos airport, effectively, so they will get some traffic from Lagos. But yeah, I think the two most head-scratching pieces of news in the last month or so both come out of Airpeace, and we are scratching our heads accordingly. But in the meanwhile, Airpeace did win a lot of awards, including Captain Callistus for winning Pilot of the Year in Nigeria, which I did not know was an award until it was announced last week that he won it. So congrats to Captain Callistus of Airpeace for winning Pilot of the Year. John, that's a new award we need to put in at the for our year-end ceremony. We need to do Pilot of the Year.
Yeah. Maybe we'll take a rain check on that one, and maybe this whole gateway thing is just a shot across the bows to FAN and the airport authority to say, hey, sort out the infrastructure. I'm contemplating. I've got nowhere else to take my business, but I'm going to say that away we go. Or is this a FAN airport, Sean? I don't even know. Is it a private airport, or is it owned by the guys?
That has been developed by the state government. And like every other move in Nigeria, you try to cozy up to state governments and be, just basically be a toady brown nosing the state government because you want every governor that you can get on your side. So by promising to do that, even though it will not come to fruition, and I mean honestly, I checked on this. They have not applied to change their slots. They have not received or even applied for, when I checked, any approval from UK Border Agency, which is the one factor which means that Ogun to Heathrow is not going to start because UKBA had not even been asked to audit and work on their systems to use Ogun as a last point of departure to the UK. So that it's not going to happen. Well, it's definitely not going to happen on the 7th of April, which is when it was announced to happen. That was now 2 weeks ago. And so, yeah, as I said, there's so much nonsense that comes out, not necessarily from Air Peace. Some of it comes out of Air Peace. Some of it comes out from sycophantic journalists who pick up the slightest throwaway bit and, blow it into this. So it's hard to keep track of what is real and what's not. I mean, they were supposed to start Brazil. They've been supposed to start Caribbean. But then sometimes reality is as strange as fiction. I mean, they flew 2 flights to Tel Aviv and then stopped. They flew Mumbai, which died out. They were supposed to fly 3 times a week, 777s to Johannesburg. And in the end, they were flying an Embraer once a week, which even that stopped after a while. So, this is not an airline with a track record of speaking sense and doing sense. We just take it and laugh at it. I think, just don't take it too seriously, and just don't think you shouldn't take what we say too seriously either. So don't sue me.
We'll keep our eyes on that. Thank you very much. Anything you want to add, Behramjee, before we close up?
No, this Ogun London thing, as Sean correctly said, has absolutely no commercial justification whatsoever. Even using a 737 via stop somewhere. So no one in their right mind would give up an Abuja London slot for an Ogun London slot. So it's just sad.
At Heathrow, not even Gatwick. Heathrow.
Yeah.
Ogun to Heathrow.
Yeah, it's a big one.
It's just sad when get announced by airlines, not knowing that there are some smart people like us who actually know the hidden agendas.
They've got a smart person as their chief commercial officer. Noel is smarter than this. I feel bad for Noel because this makes him look foolish when I know he is not the person driving this.
But as you said, Sean, it may have just been a throwaway comment that somebody's picked up and it becomes a story, right? That's the way it works.
I don't doubt it. But no, it's not a throwaway comment because their CEO made that comment. We have seen him quoted in multiple things, but he makes it as a throwaway comment, and that is irresponsible for the CEO of an airline to be saying stupid things like that. I'm sorry, but you lose your credibility. So when you wonder why people don't take him seriously and don't take the airline seriously, this is why, because you talk shit.
Well, there are some people in the world who are in incredible offices that often do this too, but we'll leave that there for this month. I think that makes sense. We don't want to get too political on this, but away we go. Right. Thank you both for joining us today. Thank you, everybody out there, for watching, listening. Hope you did enjoy it. Obviously, if you did, please do like and subscribe. We're obviously on the YouTube channel, also on all of the podcast channels. So you'll be able to watch this recording back if you missed any of it. It will also be uploaded to all of our audio channels, so you can listen on Spotify, Apple, Google, etc. We're about 7 weeks away from AviaDev in Gaborone in 10th to the 12th of June. So if you haven't registered yet, do get over there. We've got an amazing agenda already. So that's aviadev.com. Go and check it out. I will be in Addis next week for Focus Africa, for IATA's event. So I'm looking forward to seeing people there if I survive the London Marathon, which I will be taking part in on Sunday, raising valuable funds for the Born Free Foundation that does a lot of work for conservation in Africa. And one of my anchor sponsors is the wonderful TAG Angola Airlines. So thank you to the team there for their
Are you
amazing
wearing the
support.
gorilla suit?
Not this time. I'm wearing a TAG branded T-shirt, which will be going for it. So I'd like to run a little bit faster than when I wore a gorilla suit, but we will see. That all depends on the day and that my injuries don't flare up and my age doesn't catch up with me. But yeah, I'm looking forward to being back with everybody. Thank you all for listening, and we will play you out with our little sting, and we'll see you for the next episode very soon. Bye bye for now.